Today's webinar or online conference of Islam and Liberty Network, we will be talking about the economic challenges faced by particularly three countries after the Arab Spring, namely Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. As we all know that these countries and other countries in the region have gone through different stages of political and democratic transition. Each has a unique case perhaps, and so it's not easy to compare. But I think what is perhaps common across the region is the economic challenges being faced by the population of these countries, whether it is issues of job, economic growth, or investment or trade. We'll be starting from Morocco, Dr. Nouh Harmouzi, who is a professor of economics at Ibn Tufayl University and also director of Arab Center. And grateful that he has taken also time because he is also busy in organizing and running Arab Liberty Festival. He's part of the Island Council, and so because he is also engaged in this festival, so he'll be speaking first, and followed up by a couple of questions. Then he will excuse, and then we'll continue with the other two speakers here. I think we can start without further ado with the presentation or remarks from Dr. Nouh Harmouzi. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ali. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go on.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for the great work of the Islam and Liberty Network. I'm delighted. I'm happy. I'm honored and humbled to be with this panel of great speakers and with Riyad Hawi and with Ayman. So I had the occasion to listen to them, and this is a great opportunity to talk with them in this panel today. So I will try to talk about the situation of Morocco and to present to you today my take, my input about the situation. About the evolution of the situation in Morocco after the so-called Arab Spring. And from our perspective, from classical liberal perspective, I will try to identify some dysfunctional elements and to suggest a solution. So I will present quickly the case of Morocco, and I will answer to some questions later on. So the case in Morocco, we definitely had, like the other countries, our Arab Spring, but we had kind of specific Arab Spring on February 20th. We have here in Morocco the movement of 20 Février, or the movement of February 20 in 2011. This movement was inspired by the Arab Spring waves. So thousands of Moroccans, they went into the street, they railed in Rabat in protest that lasted until spring of 2012. So they demanded an end to corruption, change in governments, better housing, employment, better living conditions, and above all, a change in the constitutions. So finally, this protest successfully ushered in a new constitutions, now known as what we call here in Morocco, the 2011 constitution. So the first question is, what happened to this movement asking for reforms? So the movement 20 February message later on became quite inconsistent and less relevant when the king of Morocco kind of responded to demand with some reforms. Moreover, the movement, 20 February movement, become gradually and increasingly incompatible with Moroccans, with Moroccan perceptions, as the movement image became framed as an extreme and composed of fringe group that hoped for radical and revolutionary change. So the movement gradually declined after the change occurred in the political environment. In addition to this, we must say it's kind of preparation along with smear campaigns against the members of the movements. So in the end, they were divided. So two elements. The first is they appear to be totally at odds on the reality of Morocco. So a lot of people, they perceive them as radicals or asking for revolutionary changes, the first. Second, the regime persecutes some of them, etc. And this is why gradually the movement disappeared, and today it's quite insignificant. So how Moroccan situation, mainly economical and social situation, evolved during the last decade, what we can call in many countries the lost decade. So how this movement asking for reforms impacts the situation. So we can see the cup from the first, the empty half or the full half. So I will try, I will in the beginning talk about the full half. So some real and encouraging achievements realized in this in the last 10 years after many reforms. So many macroeconomics and social indicators, they show kind of an improved socioeconomic landscape. In Morocco, after the Arab Spring, I will just present a few examples. An increase of per capita income in the country. Exports in Morocco, they increased. The poverty headcount ratio at the national poverty line decreased. Life expectancy increased. Employment decreased to, so now with the figures, the official figures are 9% in 2009. We witness also the growth of specific industries like automotive and aerospace and real infrastructural development in Morocco. Morocco also engaged in strategy to move to high-end markets and diversify industrial production. Also, Morocco has also progressed in its doing business on environments, moving up 9 places in 2019, doing business ranking to 16th place out of 190 economies, if we compare that to the previous years, and up from a ranking of 129 in 2009. So huge steps and huge improvements, reflecting many years of serious reforms. So this is the full part of the cup. So these are the strengths, these are the good points, but still Morocco is a developing country. So we are facing the reforms we are facing, they have many limits and many challenges. So what are the current challenges? So nearly a quarter of Moroccans are poor or at risk of poverty. And the gap between the highest and the lowest socioeconomic classes is wide. So we have a huge disparity and huge and great inequality in Morocco. Morocco's Gini index is nearly 40.9%. While poverty has decreased countrywide, it's still prevalent in rural areas. So, in addition to that, the Moroccan economy still fragile, largely dependent on agricultural activities, which makes this agriculture vulnerable to poor harvests and environmental shocks. So I just want to to stress few or to give to your audience a few numbers. We depend here in Morocco on the performance of the agricultural sector. 40% of our GDP is from the agricultural sector, and the agriculture in Morocco it's employ nearly 40% or 50% of the population, and we depend a lot on the climate and water vulnerability. And we know that we have what we call in French stress hydrique. We have a huge risk on water here in Morocco and availability of water. As well, our agriculture depends a lot on our trade with European Union. So another challenge, another big challenge in Morocco is youth unemployment, which present problem after the reform, even after the reform, is still a present problem in Morocco. And it's around 16 or 17% of the population. And this problem, we face it more in the case of the youth unemployment. And we have here in Morocco 22% of youth nationally employed, and nearly 40% of youth in the urban areas are not employed. So you can imagine that half of the urban population is not employed. This is a very pressing problem in Morocco. After the COVID, before and after the COVID, and despite of these reforms in Morocco, the debt is very high. We have twin deficits, etc. Here in Morocco, after the reform, we still face competition of countries like such as Turkey or Egypt, and we have a very still weak productivity and low competitiveness of the Moroccan entrepreneurs. So I want to stress also two paradoxes here in Morocco. The first one, that's Morocco, we have the highest rate of investments in the world. So we have nearly 32% of the GDP as public and private investments, but the growth rate does not follow this big investment. So the growth rate remains below expectations and is unfortunately still driven by private and public consumption. So a lot of investment, but with a very weak impact, private and public. This is one of the biggest paradox of Morocco. The second big paradox that I want to present to your audience is that the private sector here in Morocco does not have enough dynamic and lack small and medium-sized enterprises. We call here in Morocco, we call it the missing middle. So we don't have enough small and medium enterprise, which is, and we know that this missing middle of the private sector, that trend to show the greatest innovation in other countries. The rest of the economy is made of suboptimal firms with unproductive activities, often the informal sector, and characterized by low profits. But despite the progress, or very big enterprise or state-owned enterprise, despite the progress made, significant development and challenges they remain, and only stronger private sector driving growth will be able to address them. So after the reform, the question is how to move from what we call here in the Arab Center a very limited liberalization or facade liberalization in facade, external liberalization, which is unfortunately the reality of the recent reform in Morocco, to real and deep reforms and changes. So mainly after the outbreak of the COVID pandemic and its nefast economic impact, the COVID will definitely exacerbate Moroccan's economic hardship. So what is needed right now, and very quickly, taking into consideration the huge debt of the Moroccan economy and taking into consideration our limited resources, we urgently need a strong private sector. And when we call about strong private sector, we think about reforms, and I will talk about the reforms needed here in Morocco and do some focus and talk a little bit about this private sector. So here in Morocco, we need to create a conducive environment for enterprises to enter to market, to grow and to export. It will require a more level playing field in terms of competition. This is one of the biggest problems. High quality human capital and skills to meet the demand of the modern workforce and foster entrepreneurship, better access to finance for small firms and startups across their life cycle, as well as supportive institutions. In the private sphere in Morocco, and this is the anatomy of the private sphere, economic activity seems to have been driven mostly by established, often well-connected firms here in Morocco, not by young firms. These very well-connected firms and established firms invest mainly in non-tradable sectors that are less exposed to competitions, like real estate and constructions. Other than foreign direct investments led firms located in the few free zones here in Morocco, the young or the small, very small firms have not overall successfully competed with established and well-connected firms or generated significant employment. So this is the reality, and in spite of what was done to enhance the market contestability and competition here in the Morocco, private sector still very weak and not able to create a job, and we are in urgently need of this private sector. And as I said in the beginning, the most important is market are contestable and level playing field for all market players is essential to foster the market competition. So I will suggest five solutions to foster the private sector in Morocco. Some of them, they are reforms happening, but the majority, Morocco still need to work more on that to be able to have this strong private sector, to be able to tackle the urgent and pressure issues that we will face after the coronavirus. So the first reform need to tackle the judicial system. So our Moroccan judicial system is considered extremely burdensome in terms of contract execution. So very long time frames and very high numbers of procedures, etc. And insolvency settlements costs are also considered extremely high. We need more simplification here in Morocco of procedures and the establishment of new and specialized courts. This is the first recommendation. The second recommendation, the land tenure is considered as major obstacle to private investment in Morocco. The problem of land access discourage national and foreign investor. It's urgent to reform and modernize certain aspects of this sector's regulatory and institutional framework. The third point, in our opinion, that need to be tackled is the Moroccan taxation system. We know that in practice, Moroccan taxation system has been permanently under reforms since the mid-80s, but changes made by various budget laws have made the tax system less transparent and extremely complex. The fourth point is the governance issue. Corruption and crony capitalism, it's a major challenge for the Moroccan authorities. The last point is the rigidity of labor code. So it makes it extremely complex to hire people. So more dynamic private sector operating under conditions of greater market contestability is extremely important, and to create dynamic of growth and tackling the economic hardship that is facing the Moroccan economy lately. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nouh. I think this was very illuminating, very enlightening talk from you about Moroccan economy and challenges in particular. And you also have highlighted solutions. You have highlighted market and private sector needs to have more space. Also, what kind of reforms are needed, especially in the contract enforcement and then taxation system. Very important points. I think I already have a couple of questions here in Q&A, and I'll read out these questions to you. So one is more general question, and I believe that this question will be addressed by other speakers on their turn. That is, do you think Arab Spring was the right way to get positive change in Arab life politically and economically? So that's the first question. So I will request you to answer. And second question is specific to Morocco, asked by Muhammad Amin. The question is, in Morocco, what percentage of the economy is in the private sector, and what percentage is owned by the government or the royal family? You already addressed private sector role, but maybe you can address some specific numbers if it is possible. So I have these two questions, and also if there are any other attendees or participants who want to speak, they can raise their hand by using the function here on the Zoom, and I will also allow them to speak. But we have these two questions for you, Nouh.
Okay, good. It's I don't know if I can answer to these two questions, but I will try. Do I think that it was a good idea to do this Arab Spring? So now, after 10 years of the outbreak of the Arab Spring, everybody is talking about the failure of the Arab Spring, except of the case of Tunisia, which is not a success, but not a failure because it's still undergoing. So I'm not sure if the situation was better. So we can talk about economically and about the stability before the Arab Spring, because a lot of people, they said, okay, the situation was better in the Arab world before the Arab Spring, and we had security and stability. So I liked a lot the answer of a Tunisian friend who told me, look, even the donkeys, they were better off there before the Arab Spring. And they had security and everything was fine for the donkeys and for the dogs. So frankly, do we need reforms in this region? Yes. How to reform? I think I am more in favor of gradual, incremental reforms, because now of the benefits of the history, I can see that in Libya, in Tunisia, even in Syria, and the majority of the Arab country, Arab Spring countries, the situation, the economical and the political and even the social situation is worst. But that was the case of France. That was the case of UK. We need to keep in mind that we had to wait nearly 400 years before being able to vote and in universal elections in UK after the big revolution, the glorious revolution in UK, in French also. So per definition, the big changes, economic, political, and social changes, they take time. And in the aftermath of revolutions, the situation is extremely hard, and the transition is extremely hard. If we don't draw lessons from our failures, I think that the situation will be dramatic. But I think that the Arab people, they did well to ask for reforms. We need to make sure that we are agree on what we want as alternative, but I don't buy the arguments that the situation was better under Hosni Mubarak and under Gaddafi, and the situation was better under Bouteflika, etc. I don't think so. Maybe the insider, maybe the rich part of the population, the situation was better, but for large parts of the population, the situation was extremely hard and still extremely hard in many countries. This is the first question. The second question, we officially don't have these figures about the part of the private sector and the public sector and the part of the king in the private sector. So we don't have transparent information, and these are confidential information. We don't have access to these information. What we know, I don't want to go into speculations, that 50% on the investment of the Moroccan investment is public investment, and 50% of the investment is private investment, and it's decreasing. So now we have more of public investment, which is not good. And this is why we are suggesting that, look, guys, after the outbreak and after the coronavirus, the state will be extremely weak. It's very big and will be extremely weak, and the debt will increase. So this is why we need to encourage private sector and investment to private sector, because investment to private sector creates a job without increasing taxes.
Thank you, Nouh. Earlier, I saw Abu Murad raising his hand. Is there still a question? All right. I don't think so. The question is there.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions for our speaker from other panelists before he signs off, Riyad or Ayman?
Just if I want to add something,
please.
I think most of those countries and most of the independent country actually, they have followed the socialist policy, and they have followed the heavy statism and heavy interventionism. And maybe for us North African, since our model is a bit a copy from the French model, we have a double problem: the socialism in the roots and the statism, the French statism, bureaucracy also, which bring things to the heart. So I think most of the problems are the same. Although I believe maybe Tunisia, with this new coalition and a new political party in the helm of the power, they are trying to liberalize a little bit, but still the old left and opposition and people who are in statehood are a bit freezing things, is not moving in the right direction. But generally, there is a new mood, and this is most important, that the discourse of in the media, and especially in Facebook, maybe from our experience in Algeria, we feel that there is new discourse coming, and the new generation and the new intellectual and new economists are trying to advocate new idea and bringing new type of explanation for the situation. So I think that things, like you say, Mr. Harmouzi, need to mature, because Germany or France or UK, it didn't happen, and even in US, it didn't happen in one day. So people, they have experiment, and sometimes even they advance a little bit. There is a return back to square one, like what is happening in US. So things is not that easy, and we are hoping, of course, we are hoping that the new regime in those in Algeria and in Tunisia and Morocco understand a bit that the state is not a player in economy, must be an arbiter, must be a referee. Thank you.
Thank you, Riyad. Do you wish to comment on that, Nouh?
I totally agree with my friend Riyad on his analysis and diagnostic.
Okay, great. So I think then we can move on. Thank you so much, Nouh, for joining. Yeah, we'll continue the webinar.